Today we're going to discuss the 5 problems that I have with the Storyteller Overland Stealth after living out of it and traveling for the past 2 weeks. What's going on, everyone? Back with another episode of Stuff and Things. Today we're talking about the Storyteller Overland Stealth. I'm currently in a 2022 model and I've been traveling around in this for the past 2 weeks. Now, I haven't made a ton of videos with it because I was on a time constraint, but I will create a playlist and I'll leave a link for it right up there in the corner. You can watch through some of those videos. It's a lot of just like random stuff that I was doing while living in the Storyteller. So if you want to get my raw, in the moment, unfiltered thoughts on the van, check out those videos first, because today we're talking about the bad stuff. My impressions, for the most part, overall have been pretty positive. I really like this van. I like Storyteller as a company. There's a lot of great things that I can say about the van. In the initial walk-around video, though, I told you I was going to bring you the good, the bad, and the ugly, so today we're focusing on the bad and the ugly. Now, some of the things that I'm going to be hitting on in this video are really personal preference and sort of like nitpicky details, but there were also some actual issues that I experienced. Some of these issues relate to just the chassis in general, being a newer model of Sprinter, and then other issues are sort of related to Storyteller, but I can already tell you that any issues that I had Storyteller related have already been resolved, or there's already a way to fix these issues. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it, starting with the chassis. I mentioned multiple times throughout my previous videos that I don't really care for a lot of the electronics in these newer vans because I prefer things to be a little bit more analog. When you're throwing a ton of technology into the mix, that's when you're going to run into issues. And when it comes to this newer chassis, one thing that I mentioned right from the beginning was the choice of power doors. I have seen so many power door issues on these newer chassis. So one thing right from the jump that is really nice is that Storyteller opted to go with just a manual door, so that's a huge plus right there. But when it comes to all of the other electronics, you have things like dynamic cruise control, lane assist, you have a bird's eye view. Those are all things that I really like. But when it comes to the chassis, and one choice that I don't particularly care for, it's the powered seats. There's a lot of things that people will like about these seats. They are leather, they are powered, they are heated as well, and both the driver's seat and the passenger seat are on swivels. Now, if you combine the functionality of a swivel seat with powered swivel seats, that's where I kind of have an issue, and this is me being very nitpicky. In order to make seats in vans swivel like this, the main thing that you have to do is go from the actual seated position, possibly your driver's position, slide the chair all the way forward, grab the handle, flip it around, and then again push the seat all the way back so you have enough space up front. Now, one good thing about the powered seats is that you will find the controls located right over here on the door, and there are 3 different mode selections. What's cool about the powered seats and having them swivel at the same time is that you can set 3 different presets, 1 for your driving or regular seated position, 2 for where the seat needs to be in order for it to rotate, and then 3, you can set that preset as the final resting position for how you have these seats oriented when they are completely flipped around. My only complaint about this is really the time it takes to set up the van for camping and then to sort of break it down to be able to drive it again. So let me show you guys real time the difference between the powered seats in the 22 and then the manual seats in my van, which is a little bit older. I will also note that these seats are an option. You do not have to have powered seats. So again, very nitpicky, but this is just something that I don't really prefer. First up, we are going to test how long it takes to flip these powered seats around. I got a timer on my phone here, so as soon as I press that button, we are going to start. And go. So here I'm sliding the seat forward. As you can tell, it's not super fast. I'll reach down and find the handle underneath. I believe that should be far enough. Swivel the seat around. Now you can see it's positioned really far forward. I don't have the preset set up, so I gotta hold this button again. And slowly slide the seat back into its furthest position. There we go, time. So that took about 51 seconds. Now let's see how long it takes with non-powered seats. Now here we are over in my van. We're going to do the same thing. As soon as I start moving the chair, we are going to start the timer. Ready, set, go. Seven seconds. So again, a very nitpicky thing, but if I were to get into a new Sprinter, I would probably opt out of the power seats. The leather doesn't bother me. The heated seats are actually very nice, but I'm pretty happy with this current setup. Now, back in the Storyteller. Next thing on my list, also chassis related, but could possibly be Storyteller as well. When I first got this van, I did not use four-wheel drive until I was down in Southern California, and I got to an obstacle where I thought I might need it. Luckily, I did not need four-wheel drive because the four-wheel drive would not engage. So I continued traveling, luckily did not do anything too crazy in the van until after we got the four-wheel drive fixed. We drove out on the salt flats, got a little bit hairy at some places, really soft ground. But the van did fine, it's got good tires on it, so there was nothing to worry about. Now we stopped at a Mercedes-Benz / Storyteller dealer around Salt Lake City, and they were able to check out the issue that I was having, and it was actually a super simple fix. These two buttons over here are where you will find the four-wheel drive controls. On the left here we have a four-wheel drive select, and on the right it looks like a hill ascent button, but essentially that is your 4 low. So the Mercedes tech came out, he popped off this panel and found the issue right away. Both the four-wheel drive and the 4 low cables were just swapped. So he pulled off the plugs, put them in the proper orientation, snapped it back together, and just like that I had four-wheel drive again. Now this could be a Mercedes quality issue, but also on that same panel is where you will find a master light switch. If you forget to turn the lights off back here, you can press that button and turn the lights off, or it will turn them back on into the same configuration that you had them on in. I know that's something that Storyteller adds after the fact, so maybe when they pulled the panel, they disconnected those wires and then just plugged them in the wrong spot. So again, kind of chassis related, could possibly be on Storyteller, but again, not a huge deal. There have been some issues and recall notices for newer chassis like this with the four-wheel drive not working in a completely different way. There's different modes that you can go through, like neutral, reverse, drive, neutral, and then try again to get it into four-wheel drive. I've heard of some issues like that out on forums, but for my issue, it was as simple as disconnecting those plugs and putting them back in the correct spot. Now for the next issue that I experienced. I don't know if this was a software issue. Again, I don't care for a ton of electronics, although the control panels up here are very nice, but there was an issue that I had with the Volta panel specifically. There were times when traveling around in the van where I would turn on the inverter to use the microwave or to actually turn on the battery pack heaters. If you're running the inverter, there is sort of like a parasitic draw, as some people might call it. However, I believe it's just using more power because it's powering the inverter and you have a little bit of extra functionality. You have power going to the microwave, so it's showing the time. You have a battery pack heater, which is very important, leading up to the biggest issue that I had with this van. We'll get there in a second. So there were times when I would turn the inverter on and then I would go to turn it off later and the Volta screen was completely inoperable. It does have sort of a sleep mode, so the lights turn off at night and you can actually do that yourself. However, there were times where it just completely froze. I couldn't wake the screen back up to turn the inverter off. So the way I went about fixing that was simply just using the master switch down below it, powering off the entire system, letting it rest for a little bit, and then powering it back up. Again, could be a software bug, not really sure, but that is one of the reasons why I don't really care for electronics when it comes to stuff like that. I personally have manual switches in my van, so if something goes wrong with it, it's very easy for me to trace and figure out the issue. And now on that same topic, my next issue between like the control panel over here, I like the screen and how it's dimmable, the Volta screen dimmable as well, but the master switch just below that, which I use to reset the whole system, that has a glowing green ring around it, and it may be very nitpicky, but at night that is super bright. I did talk with some other owners out there, and I believe on the newest ones they actually have a little like swivel kind of blocker that goes into place to knock out that light. But at night, that thing is almost annoyingly bright. I'm laying in bed and just a little tiny ring like that lights up the whole front of the van. I'm the type of person that likes to sleep in complete darkness, so it is cool that Storyteller includes shades for all of the windows. You can keep it super dark in here. I slept very well throughout this trip. I was also exhausted from skiing and doing everything else, but you get the point. So again, that is a nitpicky thing. I ended up putting a Storyteller Overland sticker over top of that. That way it sort of blocked out the light at night. And I think that is an issue that customers probably provided feedback for, and Storyteller, I think, put the little swivel thing in there, but I haven't seen it personally. Now for the next issue that I have with the Storyteller, this goes for all different models, the Classic, the Stealth, and the Beast. This is something that other people have talked about in the past, and Storyteller took those customer complaints or recommendations and they actually implemented something to fix this issue that I'm about to talk about. Now when I was back there laying in bed at night, I'm used to my van with no overhead cabinet storage right where you're sleeping. My bed also sits a little bit higher because I have bed risers and I keep a mountain bike underneath there from time to time. So not once or twice, probably like 3 or 4 times, I would sit up in the middle of the night or in the morning and I cracked my head off of these overhead cabinets. This is feedback that customers gave Storyteller, and they implemented something that is pretty dang cool. Starting from the front of the van, we have a normal cabinet. This cabinet houses the shower, if you guys haven't seen that before. And then back here, you'll notice a split in the cabinetry. If I pop this open, right up top here, it's a little bit hard to see because it's dark in here. There, we'll put some light on it. You can actually remove these cabinets, so if you don't want a cabinet above your head that you're gonna bonk in the middle of the night, that is an option for you. So if you choose to, you can remove this cabinet as well as this cabinet over here to give you more foot space and head space. Another good thing to note is that if you do choose to remove these, there's just little L tracks that basically hold these in place, and they are finished behind here with this sort of like tweed carpet material. So even if you remove this, the van will still look completely finished. Super cool design aspect, and it's very cool that Storyteller took customer feedback to make improvements. I cannot say the same thing about Winnebago using customer feedback from the Revel to improve things. I just really haven't seen that yet. And now for the final and biggest issue that I've had with the Storyteller while traveling around with it. I'm not going to be putting blame on anyone. It's not a chassis thing, it's not Mercedes, it's not really Storyteller, it's just whoever was caring for this van before I picked it up. When this van was delivered to me, I knew I was going to have it for 2 weeks, and as soon as the van arrived, I was checking it out, and I noticed that the power system was almost down to completely nothing. The heating system was not running based off of the battery system in here because it was so low. If you were driving the van, it does have a heat exchanger, so it will heat the cabin and heat the water based off of the engine heat. However, when the van is sitting for a while, that is when you are going to run into issues. Now, I live in Colorado, and the week that the van was delivered, it was frigid cold, like sub-freezing temperatures, sub-zero temperatures actually at night. I don't know how long the van was sitting, but I'm assuming whoever was using the van before me went to sort of park it in storage. They must have had the heater running, which eventually wore down the batteries, and if it sat there for 4 days in sub-zero temperatures, that battery depleted pretty quickly. When the battery gets close to zero, that's when the heater is going to stop working. When the heater stops working, that is when this entire van turns into a popsicle, including the water. So when I was about to leave on the trip, I figured, not a huge deal. I'll just drive the van and that heat exchanger will heat up the cabin, heat up the water, and things should be fine in a couple of hours. One thing that I was not aware of is that the Volta system and the batteries that they use have to be at a 45-degree temperature for them to even take on a charge. Now, if your pack temp is above 45 degrees and you are at zero, this van and the alternator, just driving it can charge it very quickly, probably in like an hour or two. Again, we're working with a 12 kilowatt system, roughly 1,000 amp hours, so a ton of power being generated by that alternator, and it's pumping all that back to the battery system back there. So I load up the van and I leave on my road trip. I'm going out 70 over some of the mountain passes, passing Breckenridge, Bridge, Keystone, A-Basin, Vale, and it is frigid cold. It was about -8 or -10 at some points on that road trip. The heat exchanger was working, so I was blasting the heat from the actual chassis itself, and then the remaining hot air coming from the motor, that was enough to have hot air blowing throughout the van. You have one vent right underneath the groove lounge that I'm sitting on, and then one vent way in the back on the water side. So I positioned that back vent so that it was kind of blowing over here to the electrical side, and I was hoping that was going to be enough air to raise the pack temp and then allow it to charge. After driving for probably 6 hours through frigid temperatures and snow, it was snowing all the way out to Utah, I eventually stopped. I met up with TC. He gave me a buddy heater. I threw a buddy heater in the back, little propane heater, for those of you who aren't familiar. I set it back there with all my cargo and basically just blasted hot air at the battery packs until they got to a temperature where they could charge. Once they were able to charge, I continued on driving, and I was really just trying to drive out of the snow. I made it all the way through Utah, hit Nevada, and I was like, well, might as well go to Las Vegas. So I drove from Denver to Vegas in one day, got the battery issues solved, but when I got there at night, hung out for a little bit, came out to the van, went to go to sleep. I go to brush my teeth, and of course the water system was still inoperable. When the van was delivered to me, they weren't sure if it was winterized or if there was water in it, so I did fill up with water before I left, and it was pretty apparent right from the get-go that it was not winterized. I planned on de-winterizing the van, that way I could test all of the functionality, but it wasn't winterized in the first place. So I got to Vegas, everything was frozen, it was about 2:30 in the morning, and I thought, I'm just gonna tackle this issue tomorrow. So I woke up the next morning, tried the water again, turned on the water pump, turned on the faucet, and I heard what sounded like Niagara Falls in the van. This is something that I'm not a stranger to because, as you guys probably know, I have had a bunch of issues with my own van, and it came down to the plumbing component. So once I turned the water pump on, I heard water spraying from somewhere, and I was like, alright, here we go. The first thing I did was rip apart the groove lounge. Right underneath here where you will find a little storage compartment and a little safe. You can pull that whole tray out and get access to everything underneath there. There are some plumbing lines, but there was nothing indicating a leak anywhere. So then I went to the back where the water tanks are. I pulled the entire wall off of there, a bunch of screws. It was very not easy to do. It was pretty time consuming. All I wanted to do was get back on the road, but I had to get this issue solved. So I removed a ton of screws, all of the trim and corner pieces. I disconnected the driver's side cargo lights and pulled that panel out to find absolutely nothing again. So then the only other place where there could have been an issue was right behind the groove lounge here in the shower basin. There's a little access panel behind the shower basin, so that was the next thing to pull up. I pulled that whole panel off, was looking down, found the mixing valve, and a mixing valve is an issue that I just had in my personal van. Turned the water pump on, and of course it is spraying water out of the bottom fitting of that mixing valve. Now, having just worked on my own mixing valve in my van, I figured the best way to do it would just be to cut it out. So I cut out all the fittings. It was very tight in there, so not super easy to access. We had to actually get a flexi bit driver to get in there to actually remove it from the back of the shower basin. I eventually got it out and noticed that there were plastic fittings on brass, and I stressed this a lot in a previous video. So I went to Home Depot like 3 times in a row, once for tools, once for different fittings, once for worm clamp, hose clamps instead of using PEX. So I replaced the bottom fitting going brass into a flexible tube, which is nice. I don't like rigid PEX, especially in a van that you're taking off-road. I think there's just more opportunity for things to break when you do things that way. So I get it all back in place, and then the right side connection's leaking. Fix that, and then the left side connection was leaking. Moment of truth. Actually, here, you want to press the water pump for me while I look at it? Push it? Yep, hit it. Bruh, why is it? Oh, all right.
Is that it or not?
That's fixed it. Oh no, this PEX is leaking too. So I replaced every single fitting on the mixing valve, all with brass. tightened everything all down with some new clamps, and for the rest of the trip everything was fine. The water was then working fine through all of the different connections. I did not do anything to the back connections. I was obviously not using the outdoor shower or spraying any gear off while I was on the road because it's wintertime and it's cold. So I relayed this issue to Storyteller, and then just a few days later I got a report back that they took that feedback and they are already implementing new fittings into their plumbing. That really took me by surprise because it's an issue that I sort of discovered, and they took that feedback and immediately implemented it into their new vans. So that issue that I had, no one else should really have that. They're using higher quality brass fittings, and I believe that's just how you should be doing plumbing in a van. Now, if I could give Storyteller any more feedback, this is one thing that I don't think could cause any harm, and it could also make a lot of people like myself happy. There were a lot of screws to get off the panels, both under the groove lounge, the very back, the water panel, that one was the most time consuming, and then also the panel right here behind the shower. What I would like to see implemented is sort of the philosophy of allowing customers to maintain their own vehicles, maintain the actual cabin of a van like this. So I don't think it would hurt to put little latches on those panels, that way you can pop them off very easily. Even if it's just like a little access port, sort of like they have back on the electrical side, so you can see the inverter and trip the breaker if you need to fix anything. I think if they put high quality metal latches on there so you could remove the panels a lot easier, I think that would be a huge bonus. For people who don't like doing things themselves, they'll probably never even notice them. They'll probably never pull the panels off. They're going to take it to a garage and have someone else fix it for them. But for people who have a little bit of know-how, they know how to turn a wrench, and they might be experienced in plumbing and electrical, having quick access to those things would be super useful. It would have saved me almost half a day of tinkering with the van if I could just simply pull a panel off, look in, no leak, okay, pop that back on, move to the next spot. Now, one more thing to note about the plumbing, I have not experienced this, but there is plumbing that runs up across the ceiling and I guess down this wall to get to the sink over here. I know this is the case with some older models like the 19s. This is a 22, so if they changed it, then disregard this. But that can be a very vulnerable part for water freezing. If they have water lines running over the ceiling here, there's not a whole lot of room between there and the outside. So I've heard of that being a vulnerability. That part could freeze on you. I've heard of people insulating their lines. You could even get real crazy with it and run a glycol loop around there. One thing to note about the S-Bar heating system is that they do have glycol wrapped around most of the main lines in the tank, so you don't have to worry about your tanks freezing. Super nice touch. But one thing to keep in mind if you are a Storyteller owner, right up here might be a vulnerability for freezing. So I believe that's it. Everything else about this van has been super positive. I really enjoyed my time in this van, and I know a lot of people are already asking, would you consider selling your Revel and getting into a Storyteller? My answer to that for the longest time has been no. I've done so much in my van. It's been all over the country. As of now, in all of the lower 48 states. I still haven't made it up to Alaska yet, but I just have so many memories in my own personal van that I can't really justify buying a Storyteller. Another thing that I'll mention, which people will definitely look at as a con, vans like this are not for everyone. For the most part, the only way that I could see people justifying a van purchase like this is like one of two ways. Like me, when I purchased my van a while ago, it was a huge financial investment and I knew that I was going to live in it full time, so that is how I was able to justify it. The other side of the spectrum is people who've got a ton of money with a lot of disposable income and they just want a cool rig. People are sort of looking at adventure vans like this as like a supercar, which granted, some of them are supercar prices and they're using them as sort of like a status symbol. So there's like two very different demographics that you will see traveling around in vans. There's a lot of stuff mixed in between too, but when it comes to the price, this isn't a problem that I have because I'm not actively in the market to buy a new van since I have my own. Although having a Storyteller like this would be nice. But looking at the different models, Storyteller makes basically 3 different trim levels on 2 different chassis. So the Mode LT, that's built on a Ford Transit chassis, that one is coming in at $153,000. The Classic Mode, built on the Sprinter chassis, is coming in at $157,000. The Stealth Mode 4x4 on a Sprinter chassis that I'm sitting in right now retails for $169,000. And then if you go all the way up to the Beast mode, you're looking at $198,000. Now those are huge numbers. It turns a lot of people away. Again, vans like this are not for everyone. I do have a lot to say about that pricing though, and I'm going to save those thoughts for the next video where I'm going to compare the Storyteller Stealth directly to the Winnebago Revel. Now if you guys have any more questions on the Storyteller Stealth, this is your last chance to pick my brain about anything about these vans. Tomorrow is my last day with the van. They're coming to pick it up and it's going to, I don't know where. Who knows where this thing's gonna be going. So ask your questions down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed these videos, I would really appreciate a like on it. The more engagement we get, the more opportunities I will have to test things like this out for you guys and give you my feedback. So if you're new to the channel, consider clicking subscribe. I make new videos every single week. As always, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.